A 74-year-old veteran collapsed face first outside a biker bar. Alone, starving, his dog tags buried in the dirt. Seconds later, a pack of outlaw bikers stepped into the sunlight and saw who he was. No one moved. Then one word changed everything. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The wind rolled in low and dry, scuffing the dirt along the roadside as Hank Wheeler shuffled onward, each step grinding gravel beneath the tips of his boots like a whisper from a life that used to mean something. The sun, merciless and vast in the West Texas sky, pressed down on his shoulders, bleaching the color from his threadbare fatigues and soaking through to the cotton undershirt clinging to his ribs. His walker, a rusted aluminum frame he'd reinforced with paracord and duct tape, squeaked in protest every time he leaned into it. But Hank didn't hear it anymore. That sound had become background noise to a life slowly grinding down, same as the tinnitus from too many years around gunfire. Rusty Jack's loomed up like a mirage at the edge of the highway dust, its peeling red sign flickering in the heat like a heartbeat. The bar wasn't much to look at. Warped boards, sun-faded beer posters, a porch sagging like a tired man's back. But it held two things Hank needed: shade and people. Maybe a grilled cheese if someone took pity. Maybe just the ambient noise of laughter and bad jukebox country, something to drown out the silence waiting back home in his rented room with no air conditioning, no cable, and no answers from the VA. He hadn't eaten since Friday. The tap water in his sink had tasted like rust this morning. Still, he had showered. Still, he had combed what was left of his silver hair and buttoned the top of his faded shirt. Because that's what a man does when he faces the world. Even if the world stopped seeing him 30 years ago. Just 30 feet from the bar's entrance, his knees buckled. First the right, then the left. His hand missed the grip on the walker. There was a horrible, dry thud as his shoulder hit gravel, then his face. Dust kicked up in his mouth, the bitter taste of dirt and old motor oil filling his lungs. The Texas heat clung to him like a second skin, and his body trembled, not from pain, but from the slow realization that no one was coming. He tried to lift his head, but gravity had its grip. Seconds passed, then a minute. Then came the sound, a wooden door groaning open, hinges wheezing against years of neglect, and a bootstep. One, then another. Tank Monroe squinted into the sunlight, his thick arms crossed beneath the road-worn leather of his cut, a black vest faded from miles of desert wind and splattered with oil, bugs, and a little dried blood from a fight outside Albuquerque 2 weeks back. The embroidered emblem on the back, a screaming eagle gripping crossed rifles, encircled by the name Sons of Valor MC, marked him as their chapter president. To some, that meant outlaw. To others, it meant judge and jury on wheels. The biker bar behind him exhaled stale smoke and Johnny Paycheck, the warped screen door slapping shut behind his boots. His eyes adjusted quickly. Tank was used to squinting through chaos. But this was something else. At first, Hank's body looked like nothing more than a pile of discarded clothes collapsed in the dust. But then came the details. Sun-leathered hands curled into the dirt, the trembling rise and fall of a chest, the way his lips parted like he was whispering to someone long gone, and the jacket, olive-drab canvas so worn it looked like parchment, with faded threads spelling out Wheeler above the heart. Below that, the patch, U.S. Army, clung by a single stitch. Tank took one step forward, slow, like approaching a bomb that hadn't yet decided whether it would go off. His gaze dropped to the edge of Hank's pocket. A dog tag clung to the fabric like a ghost's last tether, and beneath it, a laminated VA card streaked with sweat and barely legible in the dust. It hit him harder than a punch. This wasn't just a man. This was one of them. A voice from behind, young and unsure, broke the silence. "Should we call someone? An ambulance or—" "No." Tank didn't turn his head. His voice was low, gravel ground, final. "We don't call anyone." He crouched beside Hank, the cracked leather of his jeans creaking, the dog tags catching a glint of sunlight as he gently pulled them from the veteran's chest. They were warm, not cold yet. "Jesus," whispered Blaze, one of the younger riders. "He's cooking out here." Tank touched 2 fingers to Hank's neck. Pulse. Barely. "He's alive," he muttered. "For now." Behind him, the bikers watched, silent. No one spoke. No one moved. In this world, calling 911 was weakness, outsourcing problems to a system that forgot its own. And Tank Monroe didn't hand his people over to a system that left soldiers to rot on highways. Not on his watch. Not ever. Tank stayed crouched in the dirt, his gloved hand still pressed to Hank's neck, counting the faint thump of life beneath sagging skin. Each beat was distant, stubborn, as if Hank's body had decided to cling to existence by muscle memory alone. Sweat beaded on the old man's forehead in thick, salty trails, carving lines through the sun-scorched grit that clung to his face. His lips were cracked and swollen, tongue pressed weakly to the side like he'd stopped trying to form words hours ago. "He's alive," Tank said, gravel in his throat. "Barely. Dehydrated. Weak. Probably hasn't eaten since Christ was in boots." The bikers began to close in, their boot steps crunching against the gravel in solemn rhythm. Goose, tall, lanky, tattooed to the edge of legality, dropped to a knee beside Tank, flipping open the small trauma pouch always strapped to his hip. No sirens, no panic, just practiced, quiet movement, the kind of calm you learn from patching up gunshot wounds in parking lots or tending to friends bleeding out in ditches outside of Tucson. Blaze hung back a few paces, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes didn't blink. The 1,000-yard stare hadn't left him since Mosul, but now there was something behind it. Recognition, not just of the man, but of the story that lived in his bones. "Saw this more than once overseas," he muttered. "They walk till they drop. Pride won't let them ask for help." Angel stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She was sharp-jawed, eyes like steel under a storm sky. Her voice didn't quiver when she spoke. "He's one of us." Tank looked up. Their eyes met. There was no debate, no vote, no club protocol. "And this country let him rot," Tank said, his voice like rusted metal tearing loose from steel. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. They lifted Hank gently, like carrying a fallen flag. Goose supported the head. Blaze took the legs. Angel steadied the walker, now twisted and bent from Hank's fall. They moved with reverence, like pallbearers in reverse, bringing a man not to his grave but back from its edge. Inside, the bar went quiet. Conversation stopped. Music died mid-verse. Tank kicked the couch forward with his boot, and they eased Hank down. Goose uncapped a bottle of water and slowly tilted it to the veteran's lips. The old man's throat flexed, once, twice, then again. Angel brought a plate from the back, grilled cheese, half a cup of soup, nothing fancy. But Hank ate, slowly, mechanically. His eyes never opened, and nobody asked him a damn thing. Because the answer was already written in the dirt outside, in the heat waves and the hollow beneath his ribs. In a country that saluted men like Hank on holidays and left them starving the rest of the year. The bar had gone still, like the air before a thunderclap. Neon lights flickered against the grease-stained walls, casting jagged shadows across the scarred wood of the bar top. The jukebox in the corner, long since silenced, blinked its useless red diode like a dying eye. The mood inside Rusty Jack's had shifted. No longer just quiet, but charged, like something buried was crawling up the walls. Tank stood hunched over the bar, Hank's wallet spread open before him like a crime scene. The leather was cracked, soaked through with years of sweat and sun, the edges fraying like an old man's voice. He read it aloud. No urgency in his tone, just iron under pressure. No benefits until the next quarter. No emergency funding available at this time. Please contact your regional support office. He stared at it for a moment, then slammed it flat on the bar like a judge handing down a death sentence. You believe this? The letter trembled beneath his fist. Behind him, Goose leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes low. He's 74, Goose muttered, each syllable thick with disbelief. Can't even stand up without shaking. Angel stepped forward, rifling gently through the stack of papers Tank had pulled from the wallet. Yellowing discharge forms, a water-damaged VA ID, photos folded so many times the edges had fused together. Then she found them. 2 crumpled sheets bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. She read, voice flat but eyes burning. 23 confirmed missions. 2 Purple Hearts. Served in Mass VSOG, Sniper Unit, Da Nang. Wounded twice. Honorably discharged. She looked up. And now he's crawling through a parking lot for soup. Blaze, never one for speeches, punched the wall once, hard. A cloud of old dust and splinters drifted to the floor. Tank's jaw flexed, the muscles rippling under a week's worth of stubble. You spend half your life in hell for this country, and they give you a hotline number and a 2-month wait list. Angel's voice cut in, low. They wouldn't even know he's dead unless someone reported the smell. Tank picked up the letter again, stared at the words as if they could bleed. Then he spoke, not loudly but with finality, like a door closing. They don't want to help him? He looked up, scanning the room, eyes locking with each of his people in turn. Fine, we'll show them what help looks like. And the room, cold, grim, faithful, nodded, not with smiles, with teeth. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning haze when the first bikes started rolling in, chrome glinting through the dust like steel fangs. They came in silence at first, not out of stealth, but reverence. Men and women who had seen war, seen loss, seen the slow erosion of promises made to them under flags and parades. They came because of the Post. Tank had uploaded it just after 4 a.m., while the rest of the club lay in bedrolls or slouched over bar stools catching fractured sleep. No hashtags, no pleas. Just the hard, unfiltered truth. A photograph of Hank Wheeler lying crumpled in the gravel, his face half covered in dust, one dog tag twisted beneath his chin. Another image, a scan of the VA's rejection letter, its sterile language now soaked in irony. And the third, a time-worn photo of Hank in his prime, 20 years old, rifle in hand, a quiet fire behind his eyes. The caption, in plain white text over black. This is what a hero looks like when a nation forgets. No further explanation. It didn't need one. Within 3 hours, the Post was everywhere. Vet forums lit up like brush fires. Patriot blogs ran headlines. Even the comment sections, normally battlegrounds for trolls, fell into stunned unity. There was rage. There was sorrow. There was resolve. By dawn, they were arriving in waves. Trikes with POW MIA flags rippling from tailpipes. Jeeps with desert dust still caked on their windows. Even a battered ambulance retrofitted by a group of retired Navy corpsmen, pulling up with duffel bags of gauze, IV fluid, and protein bars. Some came in silence. Others saluted the sons of valor as they passed, fists over hearts. The bar's parking lot, once a loose gathering of weekend drinkers and occasional brawlers, now looked like a staging ground for something older, something bigger. The media caught the scent soon after. The first camera crew was from a local El Paso affiliate, but by 9 a.m., a national outlet had a drone circling overhead, trying to capture the scale of what was unfolding. Reporters shoved mics into bearded faces, trying to get quotes. Most were ignored. Inside the bar, Tank stood by the window, arms crossed, watching it all unfold, not smiling. That wasn't his style. But his eyes, normally hard as flint, held something else now. Something electric. Because this wasn't just a gathering, it was a reckoning. And it was only just beginning. The low, unified rumble of over 200 engines crawling through the streets of downtown El Paso didn't sound like a protest. It sounded like judgment, like thunder before a war. A convoy of chrome and leather, patched vests and silent purpose stretched down 3 city blocks, creeping toward the glass and concrete bunker that called itself the VA Regional Office. They didn't chant. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their presence, grim, focused, unmistakably militant, was louder than any slogan. At the head of the column rode Tank, his blacked-out dyna churning slow and steady like a warhorse. But it was the figure behind him, riding in a custom-built sidecar upholstered in Marine Corps red and Army green, that drew every eye. Hank Wheeler, dressed in his old dress blues, what was left of them, sat upright with a quiet dignity, his thin fingers resting on the armrest, his medals pinned slightly crooked over a sunken chest. When they reached the steps, Tank dismounted and unstrapped the sidecar rig. The bikers fanned out in silence as he wheeled Hank up the broad concrete stairs toward the front entrance. The building's security staff, 3 guards in pressed polyester, blinked behind the glass. For a moment, no one moved. Then the doors hissed open and the silence shattered. Inside, bureaucrats froze mid-paperwork, mid-coffee sip, mid-breath. Phones stopped ringing. The woman behind the intake desk dropped her pen. A supervisor in a gray suit reached instinctively for a lanyard ID, as if that badge might protect him from what stood on the other side of the lobby. Tank's voice sliced through the quiet like a bayonet. "You sent this man home to die." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words landed with surgical weight. "Now you're going to explain why. On record. Right now." A murmur rippled through the room. A middle manager in loafers tried to step in, his hands raised. "Sir, you can't just—" Angel's boots echoed as she stepped forward, phone held high, live stream running. "Do it," she said flatly. "Let the world see you arrest a war hero who couldn't walk because of your paperwork." There was a pause. Then, quietly, the phones in the office started vibrating, one after another. News alerts, comments, shares. By the time the security supervisor glanced at his own screen, the view count on Angel's stream had passed 100,000 and was climbing like a fire up dry brush. Within 12 hours, that video would shatter 2 million views. But in that moment, all that mattered was the silence. And the fact that no one dared touch Hank Wheeler. The VA didn't buckle overnight. It cracked slowly. Under the heat of cameras, the weight of headlines, and the fury of a country that had finally seen too much. First came the cold, impersonal press release, boilerplate sympathies and vague commitments to do better. But the fire had already spread far beyond PR containment. The live stream of Hank's wheelchair breaching the bureaucratic gates became a national flashpoint. Cable pundits, desperate for traction, scrambled to spin the narrative. One anchor called it a biker coup with a moral compass. Another dubbed it the ghost of American conscience on 2 wheels. But for the Sons of Valor, none of that mattered. They hadn't done it for cameras. They'd done it because it was right. Within 48 hours, the VA fast-tracked Hank's backlogged benefits and approved full coverage for medical, housing, and mobility. The apology they issued was sterile, typed in Times New Roman, and signed by no one Hank had ever heard of. But the message was clear. The pressure had worked. Washington had heard the roar. But the country wasn't done. A Texas-based nonprofit for homeless veterans, Shelter Arms, offered Hank permanent housing before the ink had even dried on the VA's statement. Meanwhile, a local Harley-Davidson dealer, moved by the footage of Hank slumped in the sidecar, donated a fully customized rig with his name etched into the leather and the U.S. Army insignia burned into the fender. Vets from across the nation mailed letters, patches, and challenge coins. One envelope contained only 6 crumpled dollar bills and a note that read, "It's all I've got, brother. But you shouldn't have to crawl alone." Suddenly, politicians who had never once visited a VA hospital were holding press conferences on courthouse steps, swearing allegiance to our forgotten heroes. They posed with Hank's image like it was a campaign prop, a hollow gesture in sharp contrast to the quiet sincerity of what happened 1 week later at Rusty Jack's. It was sunset. The bar's lot buzzed, soft with idle engines. Hank, seated upright in his new rig, watched Tank approach with something folded in his fist. Tank didn't speak at first. He just handed it over. A patch. Black background, gold trim, the symbol of the Sons of Valor stitched dead center. Honorary member. Sons of Valor. Hank took it in both hands. Not shaking, not weeping. Just still. For a man who had once been discarded like an empty shell casing, this wasn't just a patch. It was a name restored, a war finally acknowledged, a brotherhood returned. The morning of Hank Wheeler's funeral dawned gray, the sky heavy with a quiet reverence that seemed almost scripted by fate. There was no rain, no thunder, no melodrama. Only the kind of overcast stillness that muffles the world and makes every sound feel sacred. In the parking lot of Rusty Jack's, over 200 bikes idled in formation, their riders somber, patched in black, standing beside gleaming chrome-like sentinels preparing to escort a fallen king. Hank had passed the way most warriors only dream of, not in battle, not in a hospital bed hooked to machines, but in his sleep, beneath a warm blanket, in a home that wasn't borrowed or forgotten. No cameras, no crowds, just quiet. Final and peaceful. The Sons of Valor had insisted on carrying the casket themselves. 8 of them, Tank at the lead, Blaze and Goose on the rear corners, Angel walking beside, head held high, bore Hank's flag-draped coffin on their shoulders through the very streets where he'd once collapsed in anonymity. But now the town stopped. Literally. Traffic pulled over. Strangers lined the sidewalks with hats over hearts and phones respectfully lowered. Children waved tiny flags while old men stood in silence, recognizing something that cut deeper than politics or headlines. The roar came next. Not sudden, not wild, but rolling and orchestrated like thunder on command. One by one, engines fired to life behind the procession until 100 bikes growled forward, forming a steel river down Main Street. No one revved in show. No burnouts. Just a chorus of grief, gratitude, and vengeance denied. For this time, justice had come before death. At the cemetery on the edge of town, beneath an old oak tree that whispered in the breeze, they laid Hank to rest. The grave marker was simple, military grade, carved with clean lines. Hank Wheeler, U.S. Army. Vietnam War veteran, SFC, 2nd Recon. Mac V. SOG 2. Purple hearts. One brotherhood reclaimed. And beneath it, the final line. He was never forgotten again. Tank remained after the others drifted back to their bikes, his silhouette still and broad beside the grave. Angel came up beside him, her gloved hand resting on his arm. Tank didn't look at her when he spoke. His voice was low, almost inaudible, but steady as bedrock. "He didn't die because we helped him," he said. "He lived because we finally saw him." Then they walked back to their bikes. When the engines lit up again and the Sons of Valor roared through El Paso one last time, there were no sirens, no speeches, just the thunderous promise of men who remember their own. "We protect our own,"